Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. When mirrorless cameras first came out, the idea in many people's minds behind them was that these were going to be smaller, lighter alternatives to DSLRs while providing similar levels of performance and image quality. Of course, as we have seen since that point, that in many cases, lenses designed for at least full-frame mirrorless cameras like the Sony A7R Mark III that I've got here, they have typically been as large and in some cases even larger than the equivalent lenses for DSLRs. But there are a few lenses that fit the original concept of what mirrorless should be, at least for some people, and that is to be a small and light alternative. And if that is you, you're looking for high quality lenses that are going to give you a much smaller form factor than equivalent DSLR, then the Zeiss Loxia lineup of lenses may just be for you, so long as you don't mind manually focusing. Case in point here, and while it's not the same maximum aperture, I have got the Loxia 85mm F2 lens mounted on a full frame Sony A7R Mark III. And here I have the Canon 35mm F1.4 L Mark II mounted on a Canon 5D Mark IV. And so yes, the maximum aperture is not exact. However, it would not be incredibly different if I had Canon's 35mm F2 IS or the Tamron 35mm F1.8 VC mounted on the Canon here. As you can see, this certainly fulfills the idea of a smaller, lighter kind of setup. Now, before I break out into individual looks at each one of these lenses, which I'll be doing as a part of this review series, I wanted to just give you a few things as a whole about them. The Loxia lenses, as noted, they are manually focusing lenses. They are made all of metal to, Zeiss's highest grade. I mean, think of these as being equivalent of the Zeiss Milvus lenses, except for in a very, very compact form. All metal construction, weather sealing, all of those things. Now, one thing about the Loxia lenses is that they are designed really with somewhat of a hybrid approach in mind. These are particularly good lenses for filmmakers. And so not only are they fantastic lenses optically for shooting stills, but these really are designed in many ways around the idea of doing actual film work and video work where a quality manual focus lens is often preferred. Let me give you just a couple of the highlights of why that is. Number one, you can get this little tiny tool here that will allow you to, on the actual lens mount, there is a little point where the tool is inserted. And so you can very quickly make the change from either a traditional clicked aperture, where each one of the stops is defined, and there are also 1/3 stops in between the major stops. But you can also then rotate it to the opposite position, and there you can have a declicked aperture that will run through the aperture incredibly smoothly. This is as good as what I've seen. Not surprising. Zeiss does all this stuff very, very, very well. And so you can declick the aperture. For filmmakers, that can be a big deal because you might want to rack aperture or make aperture changes and you don't want to introduce movement. You want it to be very smooth. The other thing that is a part of this process is that Zeiss has designed for these lenses, this is called the LensGear Mini. The LensGear comes in a variety of sizes, but this is designed to provide a kind of a typical gearing size for those that want to do a focus follow or something similar to where they're going into a geared system. So Zeiss has designed all of these lenses to where this can fit on there and it will give you the standard gearing size. One thing I really like about Zeiss's approach here is that this is a toolless system. There is a ring here at the front that you can kind of grip, and holding the other, you can just rotate this, and what it does is it tightens it down, and so that you can easily get the fit and adapt it to different circumference sizes. And so of course once that is on, you can then have that on a focus follow system, and it's going to help you a lot for filmmaking. And so as you can see, all of these lenses in the series are very compact. Now, there is one new lens that has been introduced. It's a 25mm f2.4 that I don't have on hand. I have the original 4 here, and so that includes a 21mm f2.8. It includes the 35mm f2, a 50mm f2, and then finally an 85mm f2.4, all a part of this series. Now, in this case, these are all actually a part. You can get them as a set for filmmakers that comes in, a kind of a Pelican style hard case that is all, kind of custom molded and fitted inside to hold all of these. And so, a very neat kind of way to bring your gear along there. One final thing I want to note before I break out into individual and give you a closer look at each one of these lenses is the fact that because of this compact size, I can actually fit this entire kit in this little Peak Design Everyday 5L bag that can be carried as a shoulder bag or even as a waist bag. And so you can actually have a full frame setup with 4 different lenses in a very compact bag or space like that. So let's take a closer look at the Loxia 85mm f2.4 lens. And so as you can see, this lens itself is quite a bit longer than what some of the other lenses in the series are. Here we have the 35mm f2 lens, and you can see while it's not quite half the length, it's not far off of that. And truthfully, the lens hood from the 85mm lens is close to being as long as what the whole length of the 35 or the 50mm lenses are. But obviously with a longer focal length, you need a deeper lens hood, and I would rather them include a deeper lens hood for that case. So as you can see, fairly long, compared to the overall length of the lens. It has a flocked interior, and so that's going to prevent stray light from mounting around. Everything here is made out of metal. It's very premium. And of course, as I've noted with the other members of the Loxia lineup, I love the way that the lens hoods reverse and store. You can see how that it sucks in really tight to the lens barrel. And so as a result, it takes up very little room when it comes to storage. Out front, you have a pinch lens cap. And like all the other ones, there is a 52mm front filter thread here that is in metal threads. And so you can actually share a single filter size across all of these lenses. And I think that that is a great touch by Zeiss to design these in such a way to where you can actually share filters. It's something that a lot of manufacturers don't even think about, and I wish that they would. And so as you can see also here at the front, this is a Sonnar design, and one of their very popular optical formulas, 85mm maximum aperture of f2.4. Of course, f2.4 is not a typical maximum aperture, but again, Zeiss has prioritized not going for so much, the traditional type aperture values, but instead going for designing a certain kind of lens, a lens that's going to be very sharp, optically excellent, but as compact as possible. And that's frankly something that very few other designers, if any, are doing. And so it makes these Loxia lenses somewhat unique. Now, if you look a little bit further, everything, of course, here is in metal. In this case, you've got a little bit more, barrel space before you get to the actual manual focus ring, which, of course, is very tightly ribbed, all in metal. You can see that as you go throughout the whole focal range, and because this is a portrait-oriented lens, focus throw is a little bit longer than with the others. You can see, however, that there is a minor bit of barrel extension. I will note, however, that when you have the lens hood in place, you actually see very little of that. Only at the very end do you see a little bit of a gap there. Most of that is going to be done, internally, or in the sense of being inside the lens hood itself. And so all of the distance markings are etched on here, and as you can see, you've got a nice long spacing at all of the various distances. That's something that a lot of manufacturers don't think about, and sometimes you have less precision in the range you're going to most use the camera, or the lens, I should say, and that's in this kind of portrait zone. Fortunately, Zeiss has thought of that, and so you've got lots of focus options. Damping here is just exquisite. I mean, the lens feels perfect, perfectly buttery smooth is the term we often use. It certainly applies here. Beneath that is a manual aperture ring, and you can see that it goes in 1/3 stops rather than full stops. And so in this case, it goes from F2.4 to F4, and so your F2.8 is actually that first click. And so in this case, you've actually got a total of 4 clicks because there's an extra full aperture in there. And so, but beyond that, 1/3 aperture clicks. And of course, like all of these Loxia lenses, you do have the option, if you insert this little tool or, a flat bladed, mini screwdriver, whatever, into this slot right here, you can turn it 1 full rotation and the aperture becomes a declicked aperture. And this is particularly handy for filmmakers that might want to rack aperture. Of course, some of you may actually prefer an aperture without traditional stops, and so you have the choice here, and so I like that. I've used lenses that are all clickless or that are just clicked, and so I like having the option of going either way. Other thing you'll notice here is there is a nice thick gasket that is here. It's all metal and glass, and then that sealing, and so it makes it an extremely robust lens. You note also that there are electronic contacts, and that allows you to not only transmit EXIF data from the lens to the camera, but it means that when you start to input focus here on the focus ring, it will transmit that to the camera and it will immediately magnify the center portion of the image in either the viewfinder or the LCD screen. That allows you to more easily visually confirm focus. And so a very nice touch there. So as mounted on the camera body, you can see that this lens, of course, does have a long, narrow profile, and it's physically considerably larger than the other lenses, but as you can see, it's still compact. It balances beautifully. It's also a fair bit heavier than the other lenses. It weighs in at 594 grams, and so that makes it kind of a medium or moderately weighted lens. That's 1.31 pounds. Like the other lenses, it's very similar in diameter. That allows them to share that filter thread. And so it's a little under 2.5 inches in diameter, or 62 millimeters. Length, however, is longer at 3.73 inches or 94.8 millimeters. And so as you can see, it looks very nice mounted there on the camera. Now, beyond this, the lens has a fairly simple optical formula, 7 elements in 7 groups. You can focus down to 80 centimeters or 2.62 feet. And so not incredibly close, but fairly typical for an 85 millimeter lens. And there it has a very average, but on the upper end of average, fortunately, for an 85 millimeter magnification ratio. And so the reproduction ratio is 1 to 7.2, or right under 0.14 times. And 0.14 times is as good as what I've seen on an 85 millimeter lens. That's certainly enough to be useful on a lens like this. It is designed only in a Sony E-mount, and of course it is full frame compatible and can be used also on APS-C. One final thing to note is that because everything on these Loxia lenses moves, from the barrel to the aperture ring here, it means that unmounting them is a little bit more difficult because everything just wants to move. This one is a little bit easier because there's more to grab onto, but just note that when you are mounting or dismounting the lens, you're going to kind of really need to grab onto it, because normally you could just grab towards the front of the barrel. You do that here and everything is going to move on you. Final thing to talk about is the price. This is on the higher end of the spectrum with these lenses. It rings in at about $1,400. And so it certainly is an expensive lens. However, it is a premium lens. And I think particularly for filmmakers, there's going to be a certain attraction to this lens due to the size, the weight, and then of course the fact that it is designed in kind of a hybrid sense to be used either by filmmakers or still photographers. And so for those that are looking for a lens with exceptional color and the Zeiss quality that they're looking for, I think that they're going to be attracted to this lens despite the price. It's a premium price. It's also a premium lens. So as you can see, the Loxia 85mm F2.4 lens is just a beautifully made lens. I mean, everything works just as you would want it to. If you'll take a look in the description down below, you'll find I've got linkage to an image gallery that I will be adding photos to throughout this review cycle. So I'd encourage you to check back often to take a look at that. Those of you that like looking at stylish pictures of lenses, I've got lots of those there also. And of course, there is also buying links there, linkage to follow me on social media, become a patron or a subscriber to my newsletter. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.